Tansin Netutema. Good evening. Tiar Wheatley, Netenesigaswin, Opasquiacuchi. We start tonight with an update on the wildfires in Manitoba. There are currently 5 burning out of control, and the province is asking for help from firefighters across the country. Here's Sav Jonza with the details.
It doesn't get more serious than loss of life.
2 people died while trapped in a wildfire near the town of Lac du Bonny in eastern Manitoba. RCMP recovered the bodies of a man and a woman Wednesday morning. In a news release, RCMP said they were told the couple needed help on Tuesday, but they couldn't reach them due to the extreme conditions. At a press conference in Winnipeg Thursday, Premier Wabkanu said the news hits on an emotional level.
This loss of life changes what was an emergency into a tragedy.
Canoe said the Lac du Bonny wildfire was caused by human activity, but not much else can be shared as investigations are ongoing. At least 1,000 people have evacuated the area. It's currently more than 4,000 hectares in size, according to the Wildfire Service Fire Map. Lac du Bonny is one of 5 out-of-control wildfires currently plaguing the province, 4 of which are in southeast Manitoba. Kristen Hayward, Assistant Deputy Minister for the Manitoba Wildfire Service, said there have been 80 wildfires in the province this year, far above the 20-year average of 48. Other provinces and territories will be asked for help.
We currently have 40 firefighters from BC in the province. They've been deployed to the West 4 fire at the Pas and OCN. Yesterday, we also made a request through the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre for an additional 80 firefighters to come to Manitoba.
Premier Canoe says the upcoming long weekend presents more challenges. He shared how Manitobans can help.
The point has been made by people who are fighting the fires it would be great if we don't have to get pulled away from the front lines to deal with a blaze in some other region. So again, it's a May long with no campfires, no bonfires. If we can do that, no fireworks, that would be helpful.
Fire officials stress private drones are not permitted near wildfires. Offenders could be fined up to $100,000 or face up to 2 years in jail. Manitoba is also refuge to 1,200 Ontarians fleeing wildfires in their regions. Sav Jonza, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Thanks, Sav. It's been more than 4 years since an Innu man of Mattamakush Lac John died due to hypothermia while experiencing homelessness in Montreal. At a press conference today, Coroner Stephanie Gamache released a report on Raphael Naba Andre's death. With more, here's Savannah Craig.
Mattamakush Lac John Chief Riel McKenzie says he traveled 12 hours to Montreal to hear the coroner's report on the death of Raphael Naba Andre. But he still can't understand why no one helped prevent his death.
You have an answer like, no room? Come on, forget the rules and come in, my son. Come in, my friend. That's a human being. That's what we should do.
Naba, an Innu man from Mattamakush Lac John, passed away in 2021 after being refused entry in the open-door homeless shelter due to COVID regulations. Naba's autopsy identified that he died due to hypothermia while sheltering in a porta-potty near the open door, where he sought refuge during Quebec's COVID-19 nightly curfew.
Il faut s'indigner du constat que plusieurs portes ont été fermées à M. André dans les jours précédant son décès et le soir du 16 janvier 2021.
Coroner Stephanie Gamache is putting forth 23 recommendations to avoid a similar situation from happening again.
J'ai identifié 5 thèmes sur lesquels mes recommandations sont basées.
They include ensuring a centralized follow-up for homeless people seeking various healthcare institutions, developing a site welcoming intoxicated clientele with acquired brain injury, assisting homeless people in a culturally safe way, considering the specific needs of vulnerable people in emergency contexts, and the need to ensure permanent funding for emergency accommodation. She says these recommendations are addressed to the province of Quebec and City of Montreal.
Il faut tous reconnaître que son décès était évitable.
Gamache says Indigenous people make up 1% of Montreal's total population, but account for 13% of people experiencing visible homelessness, according to 2022 data. She says this signals to the need for all healthcare network workers to develop culturally secure approaches.
La réalité autochtone de M. André et l'absence de services culturellement sécuritaires autour de lui ont constitué des défis supplémentaires dans son parcours. Fier de sa culture et de sa communauté, c'est lorsque M. André a pu s'exprimer par des projets d'art qui intégraient ses origines qu'il a connu un certain bien-être dans sa trajectoire de soins et de services.
Chief Mackenzie says he's bringing this report back to Mattamakush Lac John to share it with his community.
I have a responsibility to explain the whole case, and that we're going to take the time, especially for the family of Napandre and the rest of my community. And the whole nation about that history, we're all pulling together to hope that happen again.
Savannah Craig, APTN National News, Montreal.
Tapwagiche Savannah. Over to British Columbia's interior now, where the Splatsin First Nations' recent blockade of a bridge construction site has come to an end. That's thanks to successful negotiations between the First Nation and Aecon Emil Anderson Construction General Partnership, or AEGP. The blockade began Monday morning. Splatsin Development Corporation blocked access to the R.W. Bruin Bridge construction site. It's located along the number 1 highway in the town of Sicamous, just east of Kamloops. The First Nation alleges their workers and businesses were excluded from the BC government-funded project. They say there has been ongoing broken agreements between both parties. Splatsin also alleged the nation's emergency vehicle and trucks were removed from the site despite a previous 50-50 trucking agreement. Indigenous workers were also sent home without an explanation, leading to job insecurity. On Wednesday, Splatsin removed the blockade after all parties came together to reset the relationship and reaffirm their commitment to meaningful collaboration. The new 4-lane bridge construction site is located on Sawapmuk territory. The cost of the project is $224 million and is expected to be completed fall 2027. Indigenous communities across Canada are turning to green energy and as a way to reduce their dependence on fossil fuels, including a First Nation in Western Yukon that recently started harnessing wind to help power homes and buildings in the community. Sarah Connors has that story.
You can't miss it. This wind turbine is now powering the communities of Burwash Landing and Destruction Bay.
You can see it in the skyline, right? When you're coming down the highway. I mean, that really wakes people up to say, wow, this is actually here. And then to see the blades spinning this year and producing power is pretty amazing.
Constructed last year, its blades finally started spinning last month. The turbine is owned and operated by the Kluane First Nation. Like many communities across the north, Kluane relies on diesel.
So what we've been trying to do now is, trying to get away from burning fossil fuels.
The First Nation has long looked for greener alternatives and has already incorporated solar panels on some of its buildings. The turbine is expected to further reduce its reliance on diesel by over 300,000 liters per year. That means the community's diesel plant will be turned off about 50% of the time. Dixon says wind energy aligns with his people's traditional belief system.
Let's take care of our environment. Let's protect it for our future generations, and let's take care of our animals and everything that needs to survive, right?
We're really excited about being a part of the project.
ATCO Electric, which operates the community's diesel plant, has an electricity purchase agreement with Kluane. When the turbine is in use, it offsets the cost of running the plant.
It just helps us supply everybody's electricity with renewables, but also gets us the ability to move the cost of running that power plant to give it to the First Nation for running their power plant, which is a wind turbine.
The project cost nearly $18 million to complete, with most of the funding coming from Ottawa. The expected lifetime for the turbine is 25 years. With a population of roughly 150 people, the turbine generates more power than the community actually needs. Now, the question is what to do with it.
The way we look at this is, what can we do to make the best use of that?
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Destruction Bay.
Thanks, Sarah. Time for a quick break. It's Thursday, so Truth and Politics panel is next. Stay with us. Pitigua, welcome back. This week, Prime Minister Mark Carney unveiled his new cabinet, and 3 Indigenous members of Parliament will be part of his inner circle. One of the most notable appointments is Mandy Galmasti, a former Grand Chief of the Grand Council of the Crees in Quebec. She's become the first Indigenous person to head up Indigenous Services Canada. For more, our Truth in Politics panel is here. Negon Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press, and helping us out this week, Cassidy Caron, the former president of the Métis National Council and a principal with First Peoples Group. Negon, we'll start with you and your initial thoughts on the makeup of this cabinet.
Well, a record number of Indigenous MPs. We've never seen 3 before. We've seen close to 3 a number of periods of time. And so that's significant. I think Mandy Galmasti will have an overwhelming job that she's got to hit the ground running, dealing with the unfinished issue of child welfare with the Assembly of First Nations. She's got an ongoing series of challenges with Métis people across the country, particularly situations involving the MNO. She's also got a huge issue of forest fires and flooding, which is now occurring and creating emergency situations. And then we have Buckley Boulanger, as we should be pronouncing the name properly. Buckley's going to be in a situation, the only Liberal MP of Northern Saskatchewan, a huge issue of separatism going in the province. But the real wild card is Rebecca Chartrand. Not only does she have to handle the fact she's the only MP from Manitoba, the most significant growing Indigenous population in the country, she's also the head of 1/3 of the province. That's a huge riding, the second biggest riding in the country. And now she's also in charge of the North. And I mean, Arctic sovereignty, issues of resource development in the North. And never mind the fact that now we have an Indigenous woman who, in Manitoba, is, of course, a position of historical harm, historical mistreatment. And now we're asking an Indigenous woman to take on the most complicated portfolio in this cabinet and maybe in Canadian history. I think it's a very interesting time, and I wish her luck. I wish all of them luck, in fact.
Absolutely. And Cassidy, your thoughts on the new cabinet?
Yeah, I think it was a really well thought through cabinet with representation from all across the country. Definitely the highlight would be the 3 out of 38 cabinet ministers being Indigenous, and a little bit of math on that. That's almost 8% of the cabinet. And with 5% of Indigenous peoples in this country of our population, it's almost the first time that we're actually overrepresented in a situation. So on this cabinet, which is really fantastic to see. We're moving the needle on representation in this country. I agree with Negon there. Big file for Rebecca Chartrand. Taking over that file for Dan Vandal, who was a Métis man who held the Northern Affairs file right before this election, but adding in the Arctic affairs. And of course, with Arctic sovereignty being a massive conversation throughout this election, it's a big file for her. But looking forward to seeing how our strong Indigenous women can take on these files and do a really good job.
You know, Negon, you gave us a brief roundup there earlier, but let's talk about Mandy Galmasti. In a historic move, she'll become she is the first status Indian Minister of Indigenous Services Canada. What do you think of that move?
Well, the first Indigenous I would say, Dan Vandal certainly did an incredible job bringing sensibility. Leonard Gluckluck brought, of course, the longest-serving Indigenous cabinet minister to the cabinet of Stephen Harper. I mean, these are really significant Indigenous leaders, but Mandy Galmasti will be the first Indigenous leader of an Indigenous-specific department. That means that she will bring a sensibility to that department that I think is similar. And if we want to see a template, we can look to Manitoba of what it means when you have an Indigenous person in a significant power position. We can think back to some of the work that Jody Wilson-Raybould did when she was literally the right hand of the Prime Minister for a short period of time. And as Mandy Galmasti not only brings the sensibility of being a Grand Chief, but also a leader within her own community. When you are a leader within your own community, chiefs do 3 times the job as any other political leader in this country. They are the Prime Minister, they are the Premier, they are mayors all at the same time, having to deal with internal issues, external issues, diplomacy, even down to the very basic tenets of infrastructure on First Nations. And Mandy Galmasti will now be in charge of dealing with all of that. And having experience on the ground, knowing exactly what's happening in First Nations, and in many cases Métis communities, this is going to be a critical part of understanding and moving those communities forward, particularly in rural areas in which there's boil water advisories, which there's areas of real critical issues involving housing, which is a part of Mark Carney's agenda. This will be really critical to bridge all of those things together, and I hope that Mandy Galmasti will be a significant voice at the table and will be listened and believed when she speaks.
Cassidy, people in the past have called for an Indigenous person to head up the department. Do you think this could be a good thing?
I think it can. For Indigenous Services Canada, yes, it can. I was wondering before the cabinet shuffle, with all the talks about making it a streamlined cabinet, making it smaller than previous Trudeau cabinets, if they were going to consider putting Indigenous Services Canada back with Crown Indigenous Relations. Personally, I'm happy to see that they didn't. Those are two very significant and distinct files. Had they done that, I don't think it could be an Indigenous person as the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations. But Indigenous Services Canada, absolutely yes. And Nigon mentioned diplomacy. Mandy Galmasti has a significant amount of experience being a diplomat for her community. She was part of the delegation to the Vatican, advocating for the apology from Pope Francis. So she's done a lot of this work on the international stage, the national stage, the local stage, provincial. She'll bring a lot to the file. I know she'll do a good job, not only just with her own file, but with this smaller cabinet as well. There's opportunity for her voice to be heard on all files. I think that there's going to be opportunity for all cabinet ministers to be able to work together collaboratively throughout their files. They're not going to be working in silos. And so for Mandy Galmasti to be at that table, to have her voice heard and to represent as an Indigenous woman on all of those files, I think she'll do a good job. There is a significant amount of work to be done within Indigenous Services Canada, as Nigon mentioned, the child welfare, the child reform, following the Supreme Court decision on C-92, the implementation of child welfare services for our own nations, but also the calls for the introduction of the clean water legislation. There's been calls from chiefs saying that they want that legislation reintroduced in 100 days. That's significant. That's a big ball to pick up and get going again, as well as the distinctions-based health legislation, working with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit on a distinctions-based approach to make sure that health legislation is passed for Indigenous peoples in this country. Some significant issues that she has to tackle, but again, I have a lot of faith in her as a strong Indigenous woman.
Yeah, thank you both. We'll leave it there and continue the conversation over on the Truth and Politics podcast. It's time for one last break. The Arctic Inspiration Prize was awarded in Ottawa. Hear who won when we return. Be right back. Tawau, welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Ingo from St. Albert, Alberta was able to snap this mallard duck that stops by to visit from time to time. Apparently, the mallard enjoys some of the bird feed that's available in Ingo's yard. Thanks, Ingo. Send your photos to share at aptn.ca for the chance to be featured here. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, St. John 7, Charlottetown 11. Nain 5, Happy Valley Goose Bay 8. Gaspé 11, Chibougamau 18. Sault Ste. Marie 26, Toronto 27. Big Trout Lake 5 degrees, Kapuskasing 24. Puckatawagan 6, God's Lake 12. Barons River 9, Gimli 19. North Battleford 18, Yorkton 10. Uranium City 8, Buffalo Narrows 11. Over to the west, Fort Chipewyan 7, Peace River 18. Edmonton 16, Calgary 13. Bella Coola 15, Kamloops 17. Fort Nelson 18, Smithers 13. Old Crow 3, Mayo 14. Norman Wells 12, Fort Simpson 13. Tuktoyaktuk 1, Colville Lake 1. Cambridge Bay -5, Chesterfield -3. Resolute -5, Iqaluit also -5. The 13th annual Arctic Inspiration Prize was held this week in Ottawa. Each year, millions of dollars are awarded to projects in northern communities that commit to improving health, culture, traditional knowledge, climate change, and the economy. Governor General Mary Simon officially opened the celebration at the Rogers Centre in downtown Ottawa. A total of $3.7 million was awarded to 12 recipients this year. The largest prize of $1 million was awarded to Bibianatsiku, a groundbreaking initiative led by Yukon First Nations. It aims to establish a culturally rooted birth and reproductive health center in Whitehorse. It supports over 470 Indigenous and Yukon First Nations families.
This prize will help us expand our current scope and services for our Bibia Nasat, which means strong babies in Southern Shoshone language, with the purchase of a space to dedicate a culturally safe space for our families. In the Yukon and in many places across the north, sadly, families have to leave the community to give birth. They are separated from their children, they're separated from their families, and they're separated from their language and culture. And so this project will help us build a culturally appropriate support service, expand Indigenous midwifery in the Yukon.
Congratulations. Now here's Fraser Needham to tell us what's ahead on Nation to Nation.
Coming up after the news, Mark Carney unveiled his new cabinet this week, appointing 2 Indigenous MPs to cabinet and another as a Secretary of State. One of those MPs is Mandy Galmasti, who is the new Minister of Indigenous Services Canada. She joins us in studio. Carney's new cabinet contains a number of old faces from the Justin Trudeau era. We talked to Pam Pomater of Toronto Metropolitan University about whether this is really a cabinet of change. Winnipeg NDP MP Leah Gazan is also here to talk about what the future holds for her party after its worst historical showing in the recent election. All this in just a few minutes.
And that's all the time we have for today, Thursday, May 15th. I'm TR Wheatley, and it's been a pleasure to be here with you. Tapwegiche, Kristen Adjokore is back at noon tomorrow, and Dennis Ward at 6 p.m. Eastern. From all of us at APTN National News, Egase Gitam Kawapamitinano.